Welcome back. I would like to briefly introduce our next speaker, and that's Matteo Pasquinelli. Thank you for joining us, Matteo, who's going to talk about the mathematization of the abnormal in the metadata society. Matteo is a philosopher who wrote a book, Animal Spirits, a bestiary of the commons. That's the book from 2008, and edited the anthologies, excuse my lack of other languages, knowledge in other languages, Gli Algorithmi del Capitale, 2014, and Elise of Your Mind, Augmented Intelligence and Its Traumas, which is forthcoming, among other publications. He lectures frequently at the intersection of political philosophy, media theory, and cognitive sciences in various universities and art institutions. His texts have been translated in many languages, and he has contributed to academic and non-academic journals and newspapers, such as, the list is really long. I just mentioned a few: Springer in Multitude, Rethinking Marxism, E-Flux Open, Il Manifesto, and Freitag. Together with Witzke Maas in 2012, he co-wrote an excellent manifesto of urban cannibalism, and last year in Berlin he co-curated the exhibition The Ultimate Capital is the Sun, as well as a symposium, The Metabolism of the Social Brain. Thanks once again for joining us, and the floor is yours. Thanks, Matteo.
Maria, Rosie, and also Gode for this incredible invitation and for taking care of all these details of the organization. Today I would like to share with you some thoughts. They're a bit cross-disciplinary, so we'll touch different probably disciplines and spheres of the digital. I would like to start. The title maybe sounds a bit esoteric, and we will try to unpack it with more practical example from everyday life. I would like to start from an old quote by Gabriel Tarde. In a book from 1890, the French sociologist and criminologist Gabriel Tarde was already envisioning a bright future for the discipline of statistics, recording somehow the rise of an information surplus in that age. And he was saying the statistic was the new eye of media, what today we could maybe recognize as a computational or algorithmic eye. But I want to read this quote. He wrote, "The public journals will become socially what our sense organs are vitally. Every printing office will become a mere central station for different bureaux of statistics, just as the eardrum is a bundle of acoustic nerves, or as the retina is a bundle of nerves, each of which register its characteristic impression on the brain. At present, statistics is a kind of embryonic eye, like that of the lower animals, which see just enough to recognize the approach or foe or prey." This quote can help to introduce three fields of discussion that are crucial in the post-Snowden age of data politics and algorithmic governance. First, as the reference to enemy recognition suggests the realm of battlefields and warfare, military affairs and geopolitics, drones and forensics. Forensics, of course, as a counter practice of activism today. Second, as this reference to the enemy brings to the field of sociology and criminology, to the definition and the institution of the internal enemy of society, that is the abnormal, as in the tradition of Canguilhem, Foucault, and biopolitical studies. Third, we see clearly an enemy also from the point of view of labor exploitation, according to which the worker is an anomaly to measure, optimize, and sometimes criminalize, as Marxism would record. In these cases, of course, the position of the enemy, of the abnormal, of the antisocial individual as much as of the reluctant worker that falls under the eye of statistics and algorithm for data analysis nowadays, can be always reversed, and the new political subject can be described as and reconfigured, as the research project Forensic Architecture, for instance, has recently stressed. But we will go back to this problem at the end of the discussion, maybe. How can we reverse politically all the subjectivity that are produced by apparatus of surveillance and data analysis? Briefly, a further evolution of that primitive eye described by Tard, today's algorithmic vision is about the understanding of global data sets according to a specific vector. The eye of the algorithm records common patterns of behavior in social media, suspicious keywords in surveillance networks, buying and selling tendencies in stock markets, or the oscillation of temperature in a specific region. These procedures of mass computation are pretty universal, repetitive and robotic. Nevertheless, they inaugurate a new scale of epistemic complexity, computational reason, artificial intelligence, limit of computation, and so on, that I will not address here, also because Luciano will address in the following intervention. From a theoretical point of view, what I would like to underline is just the birth of a new epistemic space inaugurated by algorithm, and a new form of augmented perception and cognition, what we can call algorithmic vision. And I would like also to discuss in this contribution more empirically some basic concept and function of this algorithmic vision that I try to define as pattern recognition and anomaly detection, that are also historical terms, so they don't need my definition. So the two epistemic poles of pattern and anomaly, as we will see, are the two sides of the same coin of algorithmic governance. And unexpected anomalies, as we will see, can be detected only against the ground of a pattern regularity. And conversely, a pattern emerges only through the median equalization of diverse tendencies. In this way, I attempt to clarify the nature of algorithmic governance and to return to the issue of the abnormal under mathematical fashion. So this is, a very condensed abstract as an introduction to some concept I will try to unpack in my intervention. So let's start maybe with the basic, with some Lego toys. As soon as the internet was born, the problem of the cartography of the internet was immediately given. But a clever solution of it, the famous Markov chains of the Google PageRank algorithm, came only 3 decades later. So usually we say the internet was born in 1969 with the first email exchange, something like that. But the first data center set up by Google was made in 1998, also known as Google Cage. This is in some museum somewhere. And they considered this first data center, this was more like a database, it was pretty small. This first database set up by Google, I consider this as the milestone for the birth of the metadata society, as it was the first database to start mapping the internet topology and its tendency on a global scale. In the last few years, what we notice, the network society has radicalized a topological shift. Beneath the surface of the web, gigantic data centers have been turned into monopolies of collective data. So what I would like to stress is the fact that the network society is a concept that today we cannot use anymore, because it has been completely verticalized in form of control that they have completely obliterated or make a form of cooperation very difficult. So we live probably in time of sort of new feudalism, and also Matthew was mentioning before Thiel, one of the head of PayPal and his theory of monopolies, the fact that today, according to him, the real economic form of organization is the monopolistic form, and the competition is just for losers. But anyway, this just to make some remarks about the fact that the form of, this idea we had in the 90s to work on the rhizomatic form, of the horizontal form of the internet, the mediascape, is today pretty problematic. And we had Manuel Castells that was defining the network society as this open flows of information. But what we have today is not just about this open flow, sharing and circulation of information, but a sort of accumulation of information about information in this sort of data center like this one. This is another Google. This is the Google data center, the evolution of the previous little computer. And these places, this is probably, I don't remember, but I guess it's this data center owned by Google in Finland. These places, this new infrastructure are precisely the place where data monopolies are today incarnated. What they do is precisely accumulate information on information. This is my reading of this. And not just make information circulate, as Manuel Castells was describing. In any case, this sort of technological bifurcation, so the passage from the network society to the metadata society, are not new. The history of technology can be narrated as the progressive emergence of new collective singularities out of the properties of older systems, as Manuel de Landa often described in his works. A continuous bifurcation of the machinic phylum, to use the words of Deleuze and Guattari. Labor bifurcated into energy and information. Information into data, metadata. Metadata into patterns and vectors, and so on. This bifurcation engendered also fundamental epistemic shift. That is, for instance, the passage from industrial political economy to cybernetic mathematization and digitalization of body. And today, in a more sophisticated topology of datascape, we will see maybe later. In fact, today, it is the emergence of a complex topological space that we are discussing with the idea of algorithmic governance and computational capitalism. Specifically, going back, maybe we should discuss some terms, and we'll do later. We should clarify some terminology. What's the difference between information and metadata, for instance? Metadata discloses the dimension, in my opinion, of social intelligence that is incarnated in any piece of information. Any piece of information, we can say, is always collective, is always political, even when it's taking its singularity, in its individuality. As I discussed in a text I published for Theory, Culture and Society, that was also in the readings for today, by mining metadata, algorithms are used basically to do three things. And they also describe three different economic and political fields. First, to measure the collective production of value, and so extract a sort of network surplus value, like in the case of Google, Facebook business models, but also logistic chain like Walmart and Amazon. Second, they have a more political role, that is to monitor and forecast social tendencies and even environmental anomalies of any sort. And this is the different surveillance program of NSA and any kind of surveillance program, maybe we will see later, also used by city police. Third, this metadata, this accumulation of information is a form of collective intelligence in itself. Is a sort of machinic intelligence can be improved, can be used to improve the design and the programming of the computer, of the data center themselves, of the algorithm. So this information can become intelligence, machinic intelligence, more precisely. But these data centers are not just about totalitarian data storage or brute force computation. The real power relies on the mathematical sophistication and epistemic power of algorithms used to illuminate such infinite datascapes and extract meaning out of them. Then, my question is, what is the perspective of the world from the point of view of such mass algorithm? What does the eye of the algorithm see when it looks at datascapes, or when he looks at the world, when he looks at our private and public life? And to introduce this epistemic shift, I use a very scholastic example. That is the birth of modern perspective. Modern perspective was born in Florence during the early Renaissance, as we know, thanks to technique of optical projection imported from the Arab world, where they were used first in astronomy, as Hans Belting also reminds in a crucial book, Florence and Baghdad. The compass that was oriented to the stars was turned down and pointed toward the urban horizon. A further dimension of depth was added to portraits and frescoes, and the new vision of the collective space inaugurated. It was a revolutionary event of an epistemic kind, yet very political. Architects and art historians know this very well, so probably it's not necessary to repeat, but of course when the modern perspective was born in Florence was also the very moment with new banking technique, a new form of, so to speak, banking power was born in Europe. Sorry, I lost track of now on my file. I don't remember if I have another, another slide here. So this was the birth of modern perspective, very basically. But when in the 80s, William Gibson had to describe the cyberspace in his novels Burning Chrome and Neuromancer, he had to cross a similar threshold, that is of interfacing the two different domains of perception and knowledge. How to render the abstract space of the Turing machine into a narrative environment. The cyberspace was not born just as an hypertext or virtual reality. Since the beginning, it looked like an infinite datascape. That is the expression of Gibson. The buildings of the cyberspace, more or less attempted to be in a depiction here, the buildings of the cyberspace were originally blocks of data, and if they resembled three-dimensional objects, it was only to domesticate and colonize an abstract space. That is, by the way, the abstract space of any augmented mind. We should read again Gibson Locus Classicus on the cyberspace to remember that the young cyberspace emerged already as a mathematical monstrosity. And Gibson was writing these lines in 1982, 84. Gibson said of the cyberspace, a graphic representation of data abstracted from the banks of every computer in the human system, unthinkable complexity, lines of light range in the non-space of the mind, cluster and constellation of data, like city lights receding. So the intuition of the cyberspace, in my opinion, was pretty military already. It was about the meta-navigation of vast data oceans. The first computer network just happened to prepare the terrain for such a vertiginous accumulation and verticalization of information that would occur only in the age of data centers today. As also Luciano reminds in her book Contagious Architecture, the question is how to describe the epistemic diversity of computational complexity inaugurated by the age of algorithms. On this issue also she quotes Kostas Terthidis, who wrote another book titled Algorithmic Architecture. And Terthidis writes these lines. Unlike computerization and digitization, the extraction of algorithmic process is an act of high-level abstraction. Algorithmic structures represent abstract patterns that are not necessarily associated with experience or perception. In this sense, algorithmic processes become a vehicle for exploration that extends behind the limit of perception. So this quote by an architect is just to refer to the fact that this epistemic space, this invisible space, this abstract space of data is a sort of augmentation of our perception beyond our physical, optical, metaphor, and experience. So it's like the idea is also pushing us to imagine a space that is abstract, global, deterritorialized, and so on. But as a provisional conclusion, here we may say, the cyberspace was not the internet. The cyberspace was the datascape used to map the internet, and is accessible and was accessible only in secret facilities that belong to media monopolies and intelligence agencies. The cyberspace should be described, therefore, as a second epistemic scale of the internet, not the first epistemic scale. This is the scale of our everyday experience, digital interface, and so on. So we're talking about a second universe, a second world. You have another, okay, yeah. In an interview with Wire magazine of a year ago, Edward Snowden has revealed an artificial intelligence system allegedly employed by NSA to preempt cyber war by monitoring internet traffic anomalies. This program is called Monstermind, and apparently it is designed to fire back at the source of a malicious attack without human supervision. Tart's initial quote on statistics as a biomorphic eye to detect enemies was prophetic, in my opinion, because here we can extend it to supercomputers. Tart wrote, "Statistic is a kind of embryonic eye, like that of the lower animals, which see just enough to recognize the approach of foe or prey." Anomaly detection is a technical term of data analysis that has been used since probably the 80s. but recently has become a buzzword in business solution of any kind, together with another technical term that is pattern recognition. What does an algorithm see when it looks at the datascape? The question I made before. The only way to look at vast amount of data is to track patterns and anomalies. Despite their different field of application, from social networks to weather forecasting, from war scenarios to financial markets, algorithms for data mining appear to operate along two universal functions, pattern recognition and anomaly detection, that are, as we said, mathematical definition almost. What is then pattern recognition? It is the recognition of a similar queries emerging in search engine, similar consumer behaviors in population, similar data in seasonal temperatures, the rise of something meaningful out of a landscape of apparently meaningless data, the rise of a gestalt against a cacophony. It was the Landa that probably described this phenomenon in more philosophical terms as an emergence of new singularities. On the other side, anomalies are the results that do not conform to a norm. What is an anomaly? It is what Grégoire Chamayou has described in his book A Theory of the Drone in relation to military decision of bombing and killing specific human targets just on the basis of metadata analysis when an anomaly of behavior emerges. It's not something we can apply specifically to the drone scenario, the drone debate, but it's true that sometimes in this military affair, some decision of killing or bombing a specific target were like taken just on the recording of an anomaly in the behavior of the everyday behavior or habits of a person in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, in general, the unexpected anomaly can be detected only against the pattern regularity of behavior. And conversely, a pattern emerges only through the median equalization of diverging tendencies. Anomaly detection and pattern recognition are the two epistemic tools of algorithmic governance, we can say. Mathematics, or more precisely topology, emerged here as the new epistemology of power, as a new epistemology of power yet to explore, very different from the epistemology of power that we studied with Foucault in the past decades. Another program by DARPA, this one, started in 2010, is probably much more interesting to clarify algorithmic governance. It is called ADAMS, Anomaly Detection at Multiple Scale. But this one is somehow public, and so it attracts less curiosity. This program is currently used for the detection of threat by individuals within a military organization, and its application to the society as a whole can be much more nefarious than Monsterbind, in my opinion. This can be taken as a model also today for the data variance of social networks, Twitter, Facebook, and things like that. Curiously, this project, program ADAMS, has been developed to forecast the next Edward Snowden case, the next traitor, or to guess who will be the next crazy sniper shooting his mates out of the blue back from Iraq or Afghanistan. How does it work? Once again, here the algorithm is designed to recognize patterns of behavior and detect anomalies diverging from the everyday routine, from a normative standard. ADAMS is supposed to identify dangerous psychological profile simply by analyzing email traffic and looking for anomalies. This system is promoted as an inevitable solution for human resources management in crucial and big organizations, as intelligence agencies and the armies. But the same identical system can be used, and actually it is already used, to track social networks and online communities. For instance, in critical geopolitical areas, but it can be applied to any, probably, country in the world. Here, anomaly detection is this new form of mathematical paranoia, somehow. So, what is interesting also for me is like this, no, still not, but these two functions of pattern recognition and anomaly detection are applied sometimes blindly across different fields. An interesting case is the software adopted by the Los Angeles Police Department, developed by a company called Predpol, founded by Jeffrey Brantingham, an anthropologist, and George Moeller, a mathematician. This is interesting how, again, anthropology and science, they meet for purposes of policing. The algorithm of predpol is said to guess 2 times better than a human being the block of Los Angeles where a petty crime is likely to happen. And so this discourse is also related to the fact that metadata, data analysis are crucially useful for forecasting of different things, behavior of any sort, consumer tendency, and so on. This algorithm follows more or less the broken window theory based on decades of data collected by LAPD. So this is a new form of statistical biopolitics. What is surprising for me is that the mathematical equation developed to forecast earthquake waves along the San Andreas Fault are applied to forecast also patterns of petty crime across Los Angeles. This algorithm is not very sophisticated. It's been already probably replaced by another one. I guess it's this one, with Palantir. And probably was very basic. This mathematician was just using basic equation that identical to the one used for geological phenomenon. And for organized crime, maybe it's like a matter of pride to be equalized to an earthquake, more than probably a slime, mold intelligence, things like that. But anyway. So these are just examples of predicting algorithm for policing. New York police adopted, I guess in London only recently has started to implement a proper forecasting software for the petty crimes in London. The police in Berlin has not as much freedom as the police in London, so they use very basic algorithms. So they, because of course the privacy issues and laws they have in Germany, so I don't know what they do. Probably they have a pocket calculator in Berlin to do these things. Okay, let's give another example of this mathematization of the abnormal. In a recent essay for Reflux Journal, the artist Hito Steyler recalled the role of computation in the making and perception of everyday digital images. Computation entered the domain of visibility a long time ago, we know. Any digital image is codified by an algorithm, and algorithms intervene to adjust definition, shapes, and colors. Aside from this productive role of algorithms, we can also trace a normative one. One of the big problems of media companies like Google and Facebook, for instance, is to detect pornography and keep it away from children. It's a titanic task with some comical aspect. Steyler found a specific algorithm have been developed to detect specific patterns of the human body and their unusual combination in position that would suggest that something sexual is going on. Body combinations are geometricized to recognize reassuring patterns and detect offensive anomalies. Some parts of the human body are very easy to simplify in a geometric form. There is an algorithm, for instance, Hito says, designed to detect literally assholes, which are geometrically very simple, as you can imagine. Of course, the geometry of porn is complex, and many offensive pictures and composition and body parts manage to skip this filter. And so they need human intervention at the end of this process of censorship. In general, what algorithms are doing here is like to normalize the abnormal in a very mathematical way. According to Deleuze, Foucault explored with this idea of biopolitics, the power relation between regimes of visibility and regimes of enunciation. Today, the regime of knowledge has expanded and exploded towards the vertigo of augmented and artificial intelligence. The position between knowledge and image, thinking and seeing, appears to collapse. Not because all images are digitalized, that is to say, all images are turned into data, but because a computational and algorithmic logic is found at the very source of general perception. The regime of visibility collapses into the regime of the computational rationality. Algorithmic vision is not optical. It is about the general perception of reality, of the social, via statistics, metadata, modeling mathematics. Where we had the digital image as the surface of digital capitalism, we can say that, and also this dimension of interface and spectacle, we can say that algorithmic vision is on the other side, is the computational core and invisible power. I have another slide here. Yeah, probably. This is the last one. So Canguilhem, Foucault, Deleuze and Guattari, the whole French post-structuralism, post-colonial studies have written about the history of abnormality and the always political constitution of the abnormal. The big difference with respect to the traditional definition of biopolitics as regulation of population is that in the society of metadata, the construction of norms and the normalization of abnormalities is just in time a continuous process of calibration. Bringing Foucault to the age of artificial intelligence is a big task. We may say that after the periodization based on the passage from the institutional law to the biopolitical norm, we enter now what we could provisionally define as the age of pattern recognition and anomaly detection, where collective behavior becomes a mathematical vector. It is my opinion that today the traditional notion of the abnormal re-enters the history of governance and philosophy of power in a mathematical way, as an abstract and mathematical vector. Power in the age of algorithmic governance is about steering along these vectors and navigating an ocean of data by recognizing waves of patterns, and in so doing, taking a decision anytime an anomaly is encountered, taking a political decision when 1,000 anomalies rise their head and make a new dangerous pattern emerge on the global landscape. Am I going well?
You're going very well.
Okay, good. So I
feel free to take some more coffee if you need to keep up with the intensity.
I just read the conclusion. So this is like this pretty linear description of this data universe. Now let's try to see where it breaks a bit. Gabriel Tarr, from which we read the initial quote, had a particular interest in the imitative behavior of crime, in the way crime patterns spread across society. Nevertheless, another aspect of Tarr's research was his focus on the cooperation and imitation between brains, the way in which new patterns of knowledge and civilization emerge, as also Maurizio Lazzorato has reminded in one of his books. William Gibson already dedicated to the issue of pattern recognition the homonymous novel from 2003. As we know, this fundamental capacity of perception and cognition was also investigated by the Gestalt School in Berlin a century ago. But interestingly, Gibson brings pattern recognition to a political scale, to the full scale of its political consequences. He wrote, "People do not like uncertainty." Indeed, what Gibson wanted to stress with his novel is that one of the basic drives of human cognition is that to fill this existential void by superimposing all the time a reassuring pattern. Never mind if under the guise of a conspiracy theory like it happened after 9/11, and his novel was also written after 9/11 and referring to some of the conspiracy theories that were like filling the mediascape as new form of pattern to give a kind of to population reassuring explanation. But specifically, Gibson's novel engages with the constant risk of apophenia. Apophenia is the experience of seeing patterns or connections in random or meaningless data in the most diverse contexts, also in gambling and paranormal phenomena. And now finally we arrive at this picture. When religious pictures are recognized, for instance, in everyday object or a humanoid face on the surface of Mars. This is the canonical picture of the Cydonia region of Mars taken by the NASA spacecraft Viking 1 on the 25th of July, 1976. As this humanoid face, of course, got a lot of media attention at that time and still today. I argue that, as in the case of the humanoid face on Mars, algorithmic governance is apophenic too, a paranoid recognition and arbitrary construction of political patterns on a global scale. There is an excessive belief, indeed, in the almighty powers of algorithm, in their efficiency and in the total transparency of the metadata society. The embryonic eye of the algorithm, algorithmic vision, is growing with difficulties. For different reasons, we can make a brief overview here. First, as due to information overflow and the limits of computation, algorithms always have to operate on a simplified, regional set of data. Second, different mathematical models can be applied and results may vary. Third, in many cases, from military affairs to algo trading and web ranking, algorithms often influence the very field they are supposed to measure, so they produce a kind of non-virtuous loop. It's an example, and I believe this kind of algorithmic bias, this non-virtuous feedback loop, is the problematic core also of algorithmic vision or governance. It's also, and also as Luciano has underlined, you will underline the next intervention, aside from extrinsic limits, there are also the regime of computation has to cope with specific intrinsic limits, like the entropy of data, randomness, and the problem of the incomputable. So the eye of the algorithm is always dismembered, always fragmented. But yet, an ethics of the algorithm is yet to come. The problem of algorithmic apophenia is one of the issues that we will discuss more often in the next years, together with the issue of the autonomous agency and epistemic prosthesis of algorithm, and all their legal consequences, like it happens in algo trading or in the drone debate and so on. Apophenia, though, is not just about recognizing a wrong meaning out of meaningless data. It may be about the invention of a future out of a meaningless present. Creativity and paranoia share sometimes the same perception of a surplus of meaning. The political virtue, then, in the age of algorithmic governance is about the perception of a different future for information surplus and its epistemic potentiality. So, aside from the defense of privacy and the regulation of the algorithmic panopticon, other political strategies can be explored. We need maybe to invent new institutions to intervene at the same scale of computation, of governments, to reclaim massive computing power as a basic right of civil society and its autonomy. This is what we discussed earlier as data activism or data politics for the future, but I have no clear vision what that will be. So I'd like to conclude going back to the issue of enemy recognition and the perspective of the world from the eye of the algorithm. In a short chapter titled Algorithmic Vision that I discovered after I wrote this text, Eyal and Ines Weizmann stress that the technology of surveillance and destruction are the same as those used in forensics to monitor these violations. Of course, you probably are familiar with the project by Eyal Weizmann, Forensic Architecture, and the way they try to transform forensics in a sort of political tool, precisely reversing the epistemic point of view. So if, for instance, of course, technology of surveillance or war technology of destruction is being used to identify a target to produce a specific result, a kind of deadly effect, they try to use the same technology to show, to denounce war crimes and things like that. So they try to take this technology and reverse, so to speak, the political axis of the intervention. So the practice of forensic architecture is showing in different cases that the same technology that are involved in war crimes as apparatus of vision, control, and decision can be reversed. Is a political tool. And in the same way, we may say that the same technology that are used for pattern recognition and anomaly detection on the geopolitical and geoeconomical scale can be reversed and repurposed. So we could extend the same approach to the technosphere in general and imagine a different political usage and purpose of mass computation and global algorithms. So humankind has been always about the alliance with alien form of agency, from ancestral microbes to artificial intelligence. A progressive political agenda for the present would be, according to me, about moving at the same level of abstraction of the algorithm in order to make the patterns of new social composition and subjectivity emerge. This is, of course, a kind of a provocative conclusion and also a very temporary statement, probably. We can and we have to produce institutions out of data and algorithms. If the abnormal returns into politics as a mathematical object, the abnormal that we started to study with Canguilhem and Foucault, it will have to find the abnormal a strategy of resistance and organization in upcoming centuries, probably in a mathematical way. Thank you. Wow.
Clear.